Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guests are Elisa E and Elana Freeland. Elisa is a survivor of the MKUltra mind control program. She has authored 2 books titled Our Life Beyond MKUltra, where Elisa details her involvement in the program. She offers a rare glimpse into how the dark world of trauma-based mind control created her multiple personality disorder and how, once programmed, she was used in government, military, intelligence, religious, and corporate organizations and institutions to carry out the occult agenda of control and domination through sex and murder. Elisa will discuss how she became part of the program, along with its ties into the military-industrial complex and the Mormon Church. She will also walk us through how bloodlines are a key component of the MKUltra selection process and the linkage to Freemasonry. We then delve into Elisa's experience with cross-dimensional entities as part of the programming process and the advanced technologies already in play to mass control the human mind. We wrap up the conversation with Elisa and Elana offering their perspectives on how humanity can break free from the shackles of the puppet master's anti-humanity agenda. The pictures displayed during the slideshow for this interview are Elisa's personal collages depicting her inner struggles and thoughts as a survivor of government mind control. And to kick the show off, I asked Elana if she could give us an overview of MKUltra, and here is what she had to say. Okay, so Elana, did you want to give a little background on MKUltra? Because a lot of people have probably heard the term, but they have no idea what it really involves.
It goes back, MKUltra goes back to the beginning of the Cold War. It certainly isn't true that mind control started then. Mind control has always been something that others, many people engaged in power mongering want. And so, you can think back to John Dee and Edward Kelly working under Queen Elizabeth I. It's ancient. What is not so ancient is the technology by which you can really do many numbers of people and hide it. And that's what MKUltra really was about. In 1953, when Allen Dulles, who was at that time the new DCI of the new CIA, which had been the OSS, he signed off on it, and 149 subprojects were eventually all under the umbrella of MKUltra. It also goes by names of, at varying points, MK Search, and other names. It's simply many programs looking at a variety of ways to control people and get them to do your will by splitting their personality through pain induction, drugs, and hypnosis, so that when those personas would split off, they could be, and they're called alters, they could then be programmed for drug muling, beta sex kitten stuff, couriers, memory banks, and they found so much success in it that the lying they had to do to Congress in order to get it going simply was well worth it to them. And then it became a matter of seeing how they could use this to gain control over the American government, over the machinations of it, by using sex kittens with congressmen, senators, and House reps, heads of all the military-industrial complex, such as McDonnell Douglas, at that time, Boeing, etc. Heads of state. As long as you had the cameras rolling in some covert way, and you had these young children, for the most part, these were not beautiful babes from Hollywood, these were children. And you could film the congressman with the children, and then you would have him in your back pocket. So it became lucrative because these children were not cheap to spend time with. It became a tremendous way to bend and twist men into what you wanted them to be and to do your will. And that's really how it started.
So, Elana, when we talk about children, are we talking about preteens, teens, young adults? What are we talking about age-wise?
Do you want to respond to that?
I would honestly say probably any age. There are pedophiles that are very interested in infants. There are pedophiles that like toddlers, adolescents. It seems to be a real pattern of prepubescence. And then, even beyond that, eventually you even get into, teenagers and in many cases adults. There was sex use for me from childhood straight through to the adult years. And again, when we're talking about split personalities, I have alternate personalities who are children, and I'm in my 50s. If those alters under full programming come out, I behave and speak like whatever age that alter was designed for. So you even got that someone may want an adult that trips into a childlike behavior.
Very interesting. Can you give us some background, Elisa, on how you became involved in the program?
Well, there's some of that still remains a bit of a question. I'm not in contact with my family and at this time. And I also didn't start what I refer to as deep deprogramming until after my father had died. He appears to be, from my memories, through my alter memories, that he was one of my first programmers, starting as early as pre-verbal. Some of the trauma started then, and sexual abuse. And I'm not really sure if my design came in the womb or if it came a few years after that with my father getting in trouble. My father was clearly a pedophile. I noticed things as I got older with some of my nieces. There were some issues in the family with my nieces. And even when he was in his mid-60s, late 60s, our family had split. He was living in another location. I would go to visit him on occasion, and there was always kids hanging around, little kids hanging, around outside with him. There were signs that he was still, to some degree, active in that. So I'm not really sure. There's naval connections on both sides, maternal and paternal, but I'm also curious about my father's history with pedophilia and if he maybe was blackmailed into, having to offer me up. I'm not sure.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question, whether there was a military or government tie with your parents.
Yeah, Navy pretty significantly, actually. And ironically, on my mother's side, it seems a little stronger. My father was in the Navy, but he makes it sound like it was just, a couple tours of duty. And then, it was no big deal. He was just your basic enlisted man. But I'm not really sure that's the case. And then on my mother's side, I have an uncle who I know he wasn't, as far as I know, he was not an officer, but I know he was working on a rather secretive project on a base in Puerto Rico, and that he had to have clearance for the work he was doing. And in later years, he told me some interesting things that took place on that base. So.
Now, how old were you when you first became aware that you were tied into something? Maybe you didn't know it was a program, but you were aware of the fact that something is not right and I'm involved in it.
Well, there were, I have memories. Well, let me kind of preface with this. There's kind of a frontline system that's designed to safeguard all the altars below, the deeper altars, to present to the world so that no one is suspicious of anything. And then the main personality that I'm speaking from resides in that front line. I now have several internal altars that have come forward over the years and participate with me in providing information and so forth. So that main front line would have what I called bleed through. I remember things in childhood, adolescence, teen years, and through my adult years, things that would show up. but I had no explanation for them. And other ways of something I would know, and I just knew it and knew it and knew it. It never went away. It just stayed with me, but I couldn't explain what it was. And then there were the physical signs. For example, at 20, waking up, one morning with a broken hand, and having my alters trying to tell me what happened the night before. And even things with my father, things that I knew were lies, things in my family that I knew were lies. But as a child, you ask and you're given an answer, and that's the end of it. A lot of missing time. Hours as a child, but then as I got older, it seemed like there were years missing until I really began to wake up I would say it really started for me in my early to mid 30s. And then it took me a good dozen years or more to really be able to find someone so that I could begin what I call deep deprogramming.
Okay, so you really don't know when you actually got started.
Well, I believe the trauma-based mind control started at the latest pre-verbal in the crib. I have actual memories from, that part of myself, and things were happening then.
And that is typical, Mike. Early programming, the earlier the better. And there's also an interesting fact from my Rudolf Steiner background. 3 years, and Piaget as well, at 3 years old, that's the age that most children will start referring to themselves as I, whereas a 2-year-old will talk about themselves as being me want that, me going to bed. But the 3-year-old now has a presence of ego, of I am a self. Very primitive, very premature, but it's there. And so I've noticed in the many, many case histories of MKUltra that I've gone through that they generally start at about, if it's not through infancy, and what that would be the penis going in the infant's mouth, sucking on it like a lollipop, fingering of the anus or the vagina. These are getting the child ready for whatever, and that can happen anywhere from 2 months on. But before 3, usually by 2.5 or 2 years, 7 months, they will start the actual training, because the brain has to be at a certain point in order to begin the process. And that I would say that's the Rubicon for the programmer, is 2 years and 7 months. Anything after that may not take as well, and you may have to do way more drugs, way more pain, way more hypnosis. So anyway, I've noticed that.
And I would add to that it has to be systematic and sustained. In other words, they start early and they'll continue to not necessarily just reprogram, which is to me really just enhancing what's already there, but they'll solidify it. They'll constantly reinforce it. It's like going in for a tune-up. So it has to continue. And of course, in my case, I have memories of many of the things that I was used for are also traumatic enough to continue to split. And to continue to reinforce the splits that are already there. You're not being used for nice things. So it just kind of systematically and ritually continues throughout your life, even while you're in use, as opposed to just for programming.
Now, Elisa, you mentioned before that you caught your father in lies, and you knew they were lies. Is this something you can talk about?
They're really kind of, what's the word I would use? Where he was a traveling salesman. He was gone a lot. And in some of the cases when he came back, he would tell us stories, and he would have something, gifts and so forth. And there was something that I don't think it was just me. I even can see my brother's faces. Like, we all kind of knew he was a pathological liar. I mean, that was common knowledge in my family. We didn't talk about it very much because we were highly dysfunctional and a family of multiples. But there were things that were just constant, where he was, what he was doing. And in later years, as my memories from my alters and myself, the pieces I had, began to fit together. Some of those lies I was able to line up with, certain events. So.
Now, how many altars do you have? Do you know?
I don't. I have a combination of what I call full personalities, which are alter personalities that could function in the world. Like if that altar, when you were under full programming, that altar came up and took the body over, that altar could function in the world. People who knew me may notice a difference, but they could manage. They could make their way through the world and understand it. Most of the what I refer to as altars are really fragments. They're not full personalities. I have a lot of sex altars that fit that, especially a lot of child sex altars, which began to appear with with force and in multitude when I began deep programming. And what I realized after several months of their presentations were they were very fragmented. They had no concept of this world. They had no concept of really life in general or wholeness or love or care. They were simply programmed for a very particular thing. And when they surfaced or were triggered up, they did what they did and then they disappeared. So the fragments, extremely high number. The whole personalities, not so much.
Okay, so let me just recap here because I'm sure the audience is going to find this very, very interesting. So you believe that the actual entry into the program, into the, I guess, the de-pattern, repattern of the mind took place when you were an infant, that you believe your father was your handler and he was also a pedophile, that there were military connections, both your father and your mother. You have these altars. You don't know exactly how many there are, but some are, I guess, full personalities and others are fragments. The fragments serve maybe a particular purpose or a circumstance. And then you became aware of, I guess, your programming in your 30s, you said?
Well, actually, that's when I became aware that it wasn't my imagination, that enough had surfaced that I knew there was something that involved military. It involved military bases. It involved people in positions of power outside of my family. And at that point, I think it became more of a mission that if I hung on long enough and kept looking, I would find someone. That was kind of what played over and over. I'll find someone that knows what happened to me. Whereas prior to that, there were things I knew in my, let's say in my early 20s, I started having some breakdowns, and got handed off into some of the mental health system, addiction system, nothing, even put on, diagnosed as bipolar, put on medicine for a few years that did nothing. And all they kept doing was switching the meds. It wasn't working. Because they were dealing with multiple personality, and taking myself off that and continuing to go forward. So there were a lot of things along the way that were self-mutilation, anorexic, bulimic, addictive behavior, obsessive compulsive behavior, sexual addiction. All these things were showing up and nothing was alleviating because they were contained within these alter personalities. Situations where in my front, knowing certain men and knowing as the front altar that I'd never engaged sexually with them, yet another part of me shows me and I hear the sounds of, that person sexually as we're engaging. I know their shower, I know their bedroom. So all along, it's this twilight mix of I've got this everyday normal life, supposedly, and yet all this other stuff, waking up exhausted, sick, bruised, broken hand, what have you. So I took a lot of years, and you have to understand during that time, those were what I call the 20s were my heaviest use years. And during that time, I was very heavily reprogrammed and handled. I mean, I have memories of, in certain places that I lived, being on an Air Force base and being tortured. And coming lucid during that time briefly and not understanding why I was there, and why these official men in white coats and military uniforms would be doing this to me. So there were a lot of years of that, but it wasn't until my early to mid 30s that I had enough of my what I call my higher self be able to push through to say, you are not crazy. And someone is going to know, just hang on. And that was the message. You just keep hanging on. And of course, during that time, I was still being utilized. So I like to describe it as you're in a maze and you're trying to get out. But you're in the maze. You know you're in a maze, but you can't find the way out of the maze. And there's not a lot of outside support during those years. It's becoming more and more, people are becoming more aware of it, but it's really, really difficult for an MKUltra survivor to get the help they need, even when they start to know who they are.
Elisa, if we just step back for a moment, going back to when you recall being at the base and being tortured, do you recall how you got to the base?
Well, actually, the way it has worked for me is that over the years in Deep program, it's been about 7 years now, roughly. And what happened is the memories, the altars began to surface because they knew the front system was paying attention. I was paying attention. I knew it was true. And they'd been trying to get my attention for a lot of years, or at least a handful of them. And so they began, just to kind of give you an idea of how this all starts to fit together, they began flooding me with memories. Anytime I was willing to listen, there was somebody there telling a story. And sometimes it went on 24 hours a day. I bought a little tape cassette recorder so that I could tape during the night when I would, just come to in the middle of something. And so I began to record everything. I had someone guiding me on this, and he said, just don't censor anything, record it. Don't try to figure it out. And of course, he was speaking mainly to the front altar because everything sounded crazy. But I began recording it just as it came forward, just as it was presented to me over and over and over and over, literally hundreds of times from various altars, different pieces. And the thing is, it doesn't come back as like a movie. You sit down to watch a movie, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. This comes back with the altar that is showing you their part of the memory. So let's say, for example, the night that I wound up at this base, I'm probably at some point in my normal everyday self. At some point, I'm switched into an altar, or someone comes and gets me and switches me into an altar to get me there. Then the programming begins. So there's going to be several parts of me present during that event. And when they began to, my altars began to present these to me, oftentimes their piece was a small piece in the middle of the event. So they didn't have the piece of how I got there. Or, another part of me would say, bam, it was like waking up, except I knew that I wasn't waking up. I was becoming conscious, in a moment. And here I am on a table. My body's going rigid. I don't even know what's happening. I can tell I'm drugged. I can't see, but I can count the men in the room. There's a door. There's, all of a sudden, after my body goes rigid, I feel a warm sensation between my legs, and I realize I've urinated on myself. Why would I urinate on myself? And this is how it starts to come back. And then, I determined that I was getting shocked at this point. And my body went rigid and I black out again. The next part of that night is I'm now more lucid, and I come to and I'm paralyzed. I'm assuming through drugs, but I don't know. And I'm on the floor of what looks like a huge airplane hangar, very brightly lit, filled with people and busyness. And there's two people standing behind me, and there's a man standing in front of me. They've kind of lowered me. I'm naked, and they've lowered me to the floor while they discuss what they're going to do next. And so then that piece is added to the previous piece, and I know where I am. That altar tells me where I am. So years can go by, and another piece comes up where I figure out what night it was. and how I wound up over there and who I was with. I even remember coming home and then I wake up with the broken hand, that kind of thing. So it gets pieced together if I record without censoring things that didn't make sense when they were presented. It may take 6 months, 8 months, 2 years, and all of a sudden several pieces fit together and the story is there.
And do people, I just want to bring in, Mike, do people who are listening understand that programming is really about the subconscious? It's the subconscious mind. It's not the neocortex mind. That's what the drugs are for, is put that neocortex to sleep so they can get into that, what's actually called the reptilian brain. They can get into those temporal lobes. And that's where the brain research comes in, and the Human Genome Project and all these things that people feel so wonderful about. They don't understand that all this brain research started on little kids during the MKUltra that followed bringing in Operation Paperclip Nazi scientists to this country and giving them carte blanche to continue the experiments they began in the camps in Eastern Europe. So, let's put it all together, folks. Let's understand where this has come from. It's come from, well, I say that Elisa is generation 3 of MKUltra. And each generation, and it's still going on now, but now it's primarily electromagnetic. It's electronic. So that's an important thing. And Elisa, I wanted to say to you, at some point you're going to need to bridge into why the Mormon Church was involved in this. Because so far we've got the military piece, but there's another very important piece, because many churches, not just the Mormons, are being used as covers, as foils for this technology in cahoots with the military industrial intelligence complex.
And I would add to that, intelligence corporate complex. To me, it's very corporate now. I feel that the world is run by corporations, and that intelligence and corporations have fused. And even military, ex-military, ex-intelligence, they always wind up in a lot of the large corporations, and particularly defense contractors. So, but the religion and what she's talking about, I have direct memory at roughly 19, I can tell by the sundress that I'm wearing, of being introduced to the then younger, now current prophet, Thomas Monson, and a couple, almost 200 people, somewhere between 150 to 200 in this room. And they were told to me in this altar that they were called presidents. And I thought I was in this altar going for a job interview, which I was. But it wasn't the job interview, that this altar understood. And she was very confused by having that many presidents in a company. And it would be an ex-Mormon friend of mine who told me that my estimate, after he heard the story, was roughly the estimate of stake presidents. And there's a couple other kinds of presidents, I don't remember. But that's what they call them, presidents. And I remember seeing him. I mean, I was, directly in contact with him. He was speaking to this group, and he presented me, literally pulled me up and out onto the floor, had me introduce myself by my first name. And there were a lot of reactions going on in me. I knew I was in a lot of danger, but I couldn't figure out, my altar couldn't figure out. She has a very limited understanding, as many of them do, and couldn't figure out why. But there was a lot of use with the Mormon Church, and I would come to find out in deep programming as these memories surfaced, and I shared them with several people I know that are no longer members of the Mormon LDS Church. They become ardent researchers, and I would find out that the church has a lot of FBI, CIA, that they're really in tight together. And it was already clear to me from my own memories that the CIA was very much involved, at least as far as my altars understood. She often presented them as CIA men, whether we were being programmed or getting instruction and so forth. So the church, Mormon LDS Church at the highest levels, is very much involved in MKUltra slave programming and use. And I do have another memory of as recent as 2000 and, sorry, I don't do well with maintaining timelines, but the conference center was built, I think, in 2000 or 2001, the Mormon LDS Conference Center near Temple Square in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I have a memory of being in programming and altar with members, and I would go into that conference center in deep programming and discover that's where I was being programmed.
Interesting. So now, Elisa, if we go back to your comment about presidents, could you explain that a little bit more? Because I wasn't sure I caught exactly what it is that you were putting together there.
Well, there was a moment in the presentation of me to this large group and to who I would later realize in deep programming was Thomas Monson. And I believe it was his daughter that took me there. I knew her in altar as the daughter.
And we're talking about the Mormon Church.
We are.
Okay.
Yeah, and presidents is a term specific to them. It kind of means like board of directors.
Okay.
Like everybody is a board chairman.
They have different, I don't know if you call them regions or districts, and then at the head of these is what's called a stake president. And then there's below the stake president are other president terms, like they break it down into, and I'm not really good at breaking down, the hierarchy of the Mormon Church. But with this episode, it was really poignant because at one point there was some paperwork in this presentation, and I looked at the daughter confused because I couldn't read the paperwork, and she looked at me and said, "Oh no, that's just for the presidents." And that's how I found out in altar. And my altar in her mind at that moment looked around the room and thought, my goodness, she's very childlike. My goodness, there's an awful lot of presidents in this company. So it wouldn't be until years later when I began to wake up and shared this story with people who know the Mormon LDS Church very well that they said that would be the rough estimate of the stake presidents being present.
Very high up Mormons.
I was being presented for future use.
Very, very interesting. Let me ask you this question, Elisa. Before you had mentioned your altars, are you aware of triggers like words, events, people, which allow the altars to emerge? How does that take place?
There's a variety of means and ways to do this. When the program is put in or when the altar is designed, that's when they put in the code words, or sometimes it's tones, as in sound. It can be touch, it can combined with words. In other words, someone puts their hand in a particular place on my body, we lock eyes, and they deliver the code words, and that will do it. So oftentimes it's several things. There can be symbols that affect me. There can be colors. I seem to have had a lot of color programming. And a variety of things, but it's usually not just one thing. In other words, if I see a certain color, it'll reinforce subconsciously for that altar, but to pull that altar up, you're going to have several things to get to that altar. They're not going to leave it so that anyone, or it would, spontaneously occur. They had to be given, the people that wound up having access had to be given whatever combination of codes.
Okay, now how did you deprogram? What was the moment in time or the event that took place that was a cornerstone event maybe for you that said, hey, you know what? Something is really wrong here and I'm starting to get the picture. How did that come about?
Well, my father died. And I noticed that in the course of my, I don't remember the years, but there was also a woman that showed up in my life when things were breaking down, meaning my memories, things were slipping through a little too inconveniently for my handlers and controllers and programmers. And they sent a woman in who helped to reprogram me. My father would die, and then within a year or two, she died. I was actually out of state, living elsewhere, and someone called me and told me. And I noticed a shift in my memory surfacing when my father passed. shortly thereafter. And then when this woman passed, I noticed just all of this stuff coming forward. And it wouldn't be, again, until in deep deprogramming, which actually started in my 40s, that I would be told that other survivors have reported the same thing, that oftentimes when one of the main programmers passes away, particularly if it starts in, when you're very young and it's a family member, when they pass away, it's as if for certain altars, it's now safe to start revealing things even more. They're still afraid until that person is gone. So I attribute what happened in my 30s to that. But as far as what I call deep deprogramming, which I consider I'll probably always be in to some degree, I don't see it as something that's over with. But that began at 46. And the reason it began, I took a huge risk. I won't go into the whole story, but I went somewhere that I knew was dangerous. My alters were frightened and told me that I was going to out them by going to this place. It was a public event, and I knew that I might be able to find someone there. I didn't really understand. I didn't know where to go. And I would meet a man who I would find out sometime later, was sent in as a handler to kind of scoop me up and utilize me again. But he would introduce me to take me to two men in Salt Lake City that it turned out had done this with some other victims before, had met other victims and kind of given them support and guidance to start waking up. And I won't get into it's a very long and convoluted story of how I wound up there and why my programmers and controllers would allow this to happen. There was a reason. But what I would like to share and relate to your question is that when I sat down with these two men in one of the men's home, I asked them to just let me speak, to not tell me anything, to not try to figure it out, just let me basically purge up all this information. And we met for 2 days. And at the end of the 2 days, it was the pivotal moment. I remember sitting there and they looked at each other, and the one man leaned in and he said, "Not only do I believe you, I've dealt with other people like you." And it was as if a dam broke inside. I had never had anyone say that. And it still gets me a little choked up. It was just a profound moment to know that spending all that time, and particularly that period of about 12 to 15 years where I was sincerely looking for help and having that really strong voice in me, what I link to the highest part of me, to the highest part of creation that just said, keep going. Someone is going to know. So in that moment, it was truly pivotal. And I kid you not when I say a 24/7 download process began that moment. And it would be day and night for many, many months that my alters were just flooding memories into my system, because all of a sudden it was now safe enough to come forward.
Now, Elisa, when the alters speak, how does that come to you? I'm assuming, obviously, that it's telepathic, mentally within your mind. Is the conversation or the dialogue, does it come in spurts? Is it fragmented? Is it elongated conversation? Can you explain to us how that takes place?
It can be all of the above, and I think it really depends where a person is in their deprogramming process. I felt pretty much a victim to it, quite honestly, early on. It was like an assault. I had no control or management. That's the way it felt. It just felt like I was being assaulted by them, because a lot of their memories were horrific. And I had to, it's like experiencing it with them, but for me, it was for the first time. I had no memory of the event that they were sharing, and I basically was kind of reliving it with them. So in that period of time, and for the first several years, that's kind of the way it was. And then I began to just have this sense of I was going to take authority over this body and mind, and in a very gentle and loving way to start to interact with them. I mean, some of them were presenting stuff I didn't want to see, I didn't want to experience, I didn't want to know about, I didn't want to meet them. I have some very dark alters. And so I pushed them away at first, but over time I realized that compassion, and it was kind of a natural process. I didn't have to try. I stopped judging them and started to feel compassion for what the other parts of my mind and what my body had been through. And when that began, it just became a more manageable and not such an assault on my system. And yes, it's internal mind. Early on, I lost time. Sometimes they would take over and I would be missing time. So it began to be a coexistence. That's when the real work began. And my recording everything that they shared was really, really important. And Mike, I wound up doing a series of about, I think it's 36 collages, which are on my blog site, by the way. And a friend of mine took beautiful photographs. They're in full color. And these were a compilation. In my second year, I asked the altars to participate in their production, that I would ask no questions, nothing, and just show up. And we started collecting magazines. I say we, and cutting out, things that I had no idea what they meant. And, about a year later, we were finished with a series of 36 collages that pretty much tell the story.
Now, Elisa, what was your primary objective? In other words, they programmed you and only go into enough detail that you're comfortable with. So don't go anywhere that you are not comfortable talking about. But what were you required or asked to do?
Well, it's the ultimate multitasking. That's what I say. First off, is that as far as I'm concerned, every what I call high-level slave, MKUltra slave, and I say high-level meaning the people that would have access to them would, classify them as high-level. Maybe that's military intelligence, high-level religious organizations, or the hierarchy in their government, political, whatever. But anybody that's in high level is going to have several uses. There's not going to be like one thing they do. They're going to have a lot of things they can do. But mainly I call them predominant uses. And it appears from my memories, my main uses were sex and killing. And sometimes it was our altars who did that, who took the life. Sometimes I was part of a team. And apparently I was used as a honey trap to set somebody up or to get them in a certain location. And I have memories of, other individuals. I can't name them, who they are. I see faces and very lucid memories of working with them in certain locations. Some of the people I do know who they are. And I haven't really gotten into big time naming. There's a lot of faces that showed up in the collage work. But I know nothing's going to happen to them anyway, so why bother naming them? A lot of people have done that, and nothing actually happens. But
So sex and killing, and this involved very high level people.
Well, yes, and I have a lot of faces that I remember. I can't tell you who these men are. I can tell you what they're wearing, I can tell you what they look like, but they're not people that were in the public eye necessarily. So I discovered over a period of several years of some of what I call the kill altars memory surfacing, that one of the predominant uses, not all of them, but one of the predominant uses in that regard seems to be to take out members of their network that were no longer, for whatever reason, deemed useful. And I think that's what a lot of these people were. And the reason I began to see that was many of them seemed to have the codes and the access. So they were being set up. I think in some cases they thought they were getting a sex slave, period, a pretty little 18-year-old blonde girl, and then it would turn into, at some point during the encounter, a kill program.
Okay, so these folks that had their shelf life expire, were they politicians, military, corporate, all of the above?
That would be my guess. Just I know them as members of the network, most of them, not all of them. Some of them, there were some innocents in there. There's no doubt about that. But I would say predominantly I knew them as members of the network. So I'm talking somewhere in the religious, military, intelligence, government corporate arena.
Okay. And that's how you define the network.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that pretty well covers
entertainment.
And entertainment.
And entertainment. Yeah. Can't leave out entertainment, that's for sure.
Oh.
Very, very unbelievable. Really, this is amazing stuff.
You know, Mike, that she wrote 2 books, right?
Yes. In fact, I went to Amazon. I took a look at the books. Did you want to go into the bloodlines?
Yes. I'm going to speak strictly from, experience, and then kind of what I've discovered through some research and other people's input in deep deprogramming. But there seem to be very strong bloodlines, old families that are involved, and you might even do better with this, Elana, that are involved with certain religious organizations, military and intelligence, government. And what I remember, the feeling I had in the episode of being presented to the Mormon Church was that I was being presented as a bloodline member. And I can't honestly say that I fully understand that. I know that in subsequent research and certain memories that came forward, and then subsequent research, it appears that there is a propensity in these family lines, as if, I believe, this is my opinion, that the ongoing multi-generational trauma is literally passed on. I don't know if it's DNA or if you'd say through the genes, but in the cells of the body, and that someone is actually born into a predisposition, and the trauma-based mind control is again activated and perpetrated, and that it just keeps being passed through the family lines. And that behind that, for me, is very much a very malevolent, cross-dimensional energy beings that are facilitating that to be passed down the family line.
Okay, so let me just break this down step by step, and we'll get into the cross-dimensional aspect of it. So when we talk about bloodlines, because a lot of people look at bloodlines and they think of the Illuminati family and bloodlines, what you're saying is your bloodline is tied into this network. So in other words, somebody who has this bloodline is essentially, I'm probably not going to use the right words here, fair game as far as being in a mind control program and being available to be an MKUltra slave and to do the types of things that you were talking about before. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's very accurate. And I would add to that not necessarily, I think that the MKUltra victims that are going to be, taken right from the get-go, and I'm talking probably in the womb that may be an even more specialized group. In other words, for example, let's just take my family. I believe from my experience with them and what I know about them, that all the members of my immediate family that I was born into are subject to the entity that I would call entity, that cross-dimensional energy, in a malevolent way. It became a part of the entire family dynamic. You couldn't have someone like me being used and abused in the way I was without the entire family being involved. I mean, somebody would say, wait a minute, what's going on, right? What's wrong with her? So the entire family has to be part of the process. And to me, whether they were taken to facilities or not, I can't answer that for them. I don't have memories. I do suspect my brothers were, because of some of the things they drew, pictures they drew and so forth as children. My one brother drew an underground facility with soldiers all around. So I suspect that my brothers may have been involved to some extent as far as being taken to a facility, but the entities, the cross-dimensional beings, there's a resonance in the bloodline that allows it, I believe, makes it pretty much subject as soon as you're born into the body. So they can move into the family and have a profound effect on the family without, for example, the CIA having to step in and cart you off to a facility. I think that's a more specialized version of it. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
And there is another aspect to this I'll bring in. It's definitely simpler. Regarding bloodline, when I edited the book for Adam Parfrey, done by James Shelby Downard, the book called Carnivals of Life and Death. This is the autobiography of a guy that really did more to put researchers like myself, put our attention on what we like to call twilight language, which is used profusely by the mainstream media to program all of us in some way. Downard, Shelby did this in his autobiography. He paints a picture of Freemasonry at the beginning of the 20th century that is nothing short of astonishing. I mean, I already knew that Freemasons were into word magic, number magic, certainly that they had tremendous influence in west of the Mississippi. I actually did a paper for the Evergreen State College here on how Freemasons founded almost every town west of the Mississippi, including the one I live in. So what astonished me, though, is that Shelby paints this amazing picture of how Freemasons actually owned whole family lines, owned the mother, the father, the children that came from it, because of some agreement in the bloodline with the grandparents or the great-grandparents who had been Freemasons. And this would include the Elks, the Eagles, the Moose Lodge, all of them. They are all Freemason, and so is the Mormon Church. All right, so bloodline in that way is you are one of this bloodline. Namely, we own your bloodline. We own your children, and we will own your children's children, and they will go after them. We always hear about the mafia in the early part of the 20th century. We never hear about this mafia, the Freemason mafia, that owned entire family lines.
How did they own them, Elana? Can you go into more detail? In other words, somebody might be listening and asking, well, how do you own a family? How does that work?
It seems very simple to me, that you're living in a town, and I think Shelby was raised primarily in, I think it's called Arden, Oklahoma, comes to mind. Okay, the town is maybe 25,000 people. And there's a Freemason sort of lineage all the way through you've got this degree, you've got that degree. I mean, my father was in the Moose Lodge. He's Navy intelligence.
Right.
My principal sat me on his lap for 2.5 years and fondled me. And he was a member of the Moose Lodge. Did my father give him permission because my father's degree was greater than his? I don't know. Maybe my principal's degree was greater and my father had to do what the principal wanted. That's how Freemasonry works. It works in a court of law where you come before a judge, and if you're a thief or a murderer and you give the sign of distress to the judge, and the judge checks on you and finds out that your degree is worthy of his attention, you're off. You're done. So to me, it's not hard to imagine being owned. And as Shelby points out, they murder you. They find a way to murder you if you try to get away. And that's really what Shelby Downard, that's his main claim to fame in my book, is they tracked him his whole life. They made his life a living hell. And Shelby finally died in his 70s or 80s. And all those years he fought because he wanted the freedom from what they felt he didn't deserve. He was theirs. And if you're poor, well, then it's even better. But take Bill Gates. I mean, I'm still puzzled. I had lunch with Bill Gates once because I was going with a guy who was his number 3 man out at Microsoft land. And he was a different guy than the one I see now. I'm not even sure this is not a double. I don't know. I don't know how it works. But something happened to this person? Was it that someone else had a higher degree? I don't know. But I know those degrees are gold in this country and in the UK.
Yeah.
They're gold. And you have a higher degree, you get what you want, one way or another.
Right. I think a lot of people can't get their heads around the secret societies in general, and they don't understand that these are not guys that get together to play cards and drink beer.
Well, the lower degrees might be. They
Right.
might be there to diddle some, high school titty and all that stuff. But the higher degrees, oh no, 33
Right.
and above, and it goes all the way to 96 degrees.
Right, right. The lower degrees are camouflage. That's so people, hey, look, they're working at the hospital, they're doing this, they're doing all this stuff with the community and so on. It's just, it's just there as a distraction to keep people believing that that's what it's all about. But
I think it goes back to Kennedy's speech, right, on secret societies.
oh yeah.
I think if you want, there are about a dozen reasons that Kennedy was killed, because I'm pretty much an expert on that. But I would say that that's probably the pivotal one, is how he abused the idea of secret societies. I mean, in a way, we're living in an era that we're trying to move beyond that. And at the same time, the big deep pockets are mind controlling and torturing small children.
Yeah.
And getting what they want, and never paying a day in any of our legal system for those crimes. So to me, this is spiritual warfare all the way. And I am all the way committed to it too, because this is not the only world, period.
Expand on that a little bit. I was going to say something else, but then I'm like, no.
Well, I would like to add something to that. And she's right on about the ownership. And I think there's something I know there's something in our society that's been around for a very, very long time, and it falls under the name of, different things. You can call it an oath, you can call it a contract, you can call it a covenant, you can call it, a variety of things. And when you start looking into various agencies, organizations, even corporations, the entertainment industry, the churches, particularly the Mormon church, they've got quite the ritual, that they're at a point, when you're moving even in intelligence or, particularly, let's take intelligence. When you move to a certain point, you have to say certain words. You have to sign certain things. But a lot of times it's vocal, it's verbal. And you have to deeply pledge to the secrecy. And I honestly I know this, and you can break these covenants and oaths and pledges, but these carry weight. They carry weight with whatever this cross-dimensional energy being is. It carries weight. It signs you in, and if you don't revoke it, that's it. It's it from now till whenever. But you can revoke it. That's the beauty of it. You can revoke it with that truest and highest part of yourself. And it may not be done once. You may have to do it over and over and over again, depending on what was done prior, in your family lineage, and then for you yourself. But if you start looking into the different organizations and agencies, they all require it. They require that you sign, that you speak it, that you take that oath, that you promise your life, your allegiance, no matter what, before anything else.
Even corporations.
Yes.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. That goes on. Let's talk a little bit about the cross-dimensional species and how that plays into this, because I think this is going to be very new for a lot of people. They're probably not really ready for this, but we're going to go into it anyway.
I have had a lifelong interaction with a variety of beings that were directly involved in the programming process, the handling of certain altars, the reinforcement of programming. I've had very conscious, as in my daily consciousness, now talking to you, in this same consciousness interaction with them in my years of deep deprogramming. I didn't know what to call them for a long time. They weren't very forthcoming about, they seemed very deceptive, presenting different forms at times. often very human looking or humanoid looking, but then taking other forms to frighten me or punish me. The list goes on.
Elisa, just talking a little bit about the forms that these interdimensional species would take on. You said human or humanoid. When it wasn't human or humanoid, what form or what type of form manifested?
Things, a variety of reptile forms, including what looks much like a dinosaur, but even Komodo dragons, snakes, large predatory cats, as in African lions and the American mountain lions. And then it gets into stranger and stranger, more etheric, silhouettes of certain colors that could hold me to the ground. And then these just kind of odd and strange humanoid, but you could tell you weren't dealing with a human, in a variety of forms, female, male. But there were certain main characters that seemed to be there from the onset and would appear and interact with me throughout my life, both on an internal basis, and as I began to wake up, apparently I began to be able to interact with them very consciously, in everyday consciousness.
Now, when you say, Elisa, that you interacted with them consciously, was it that they had physically manifested, or was it something more of a feeling of a presence or a knowing? In other words, they weren't there physically, but you could certainly sense that you were in the company of these entities.
Well, I would say that I'm in my waking state and I'm having a visual interaction as well as a physical interaction with them. So to say, are they going to look like, Elana sitting next to me in the room? No. They're often appearing in what I call them windows. I'm fully conscious. I can close my eyes and I feel that, that darkness we all see when we have our eyes closed. Well, mine begins to take on a very three-dimensional aspect to expand. In those, a window will open up and there will be something there that I interact with. In other cases, waking up in the morning, feeling a certain pressure. I was just sharing this with Elana before we started this, that there will be a pressure on a certain part of my body, and I look and I can see what would be, I don't know the words, but I would describe it as an etheric form of very humanoid, eyes, ears, mouth, arms, legs, torso, the whole bit, attached to me at right where the pressure is. And then I do what I do, which is, it's hard to explain, I don't know, maybe it's not, but I call it calling in that truest, strongest, benevolent part, just kind of getting right with it. And I, without fear, no fear, just make it go away. This is not acceptable, and it's gone. And it either dissolves or whisks off into the distance, and the pressure is relieved. So I believe, for the reasons of everything that was done to me, that I had a propensity for being able to sense things outside of the normal five senses. And then with the trauma-based mind control and everything that was done, it enhanced that ability.
And to add something there, I think Elisa's absolutely right. In the programming itself, one of the 149 subprojects of MKUltra, which was a favorite of the Nazis, was called Operation Often. And Often was a program for extrasensory perception. It was where they, I believe, and I don't know that I can prove this, perhaps I can, I have a very, very thick file on MKUltra, that the temporal lobes, if you trigger them in a certain way with electrodes or I don't know how, you can make someone see something that nobody else in the room sees. Now, most of us, especially, my 60s generation with all the drug experimentation that went on, like to call it hallucination. Well, what if it's not a hallucination? What if you are now able to see what if, now that I've been writing about chemtrails and everything, I'm highly aware of how narrow our electromagnetic spectrum is. I mean, we are the tiniest of the entire spectrum in able to see what is going on electromagnetically around us, all the way from radio waves to gamma waves. So what if you stimulate that temporal lobe, and now, boom, you're seeing a being standing next to you? Well, you can see, can't you, Mike, why this would be denied and shoved out and called schizophrenia or whatever, because to think that we're living in a world with lots of beings that we can't see is not a comforting thought for a lot of people.
Right.
So to me, Elisa and many others who were subjected to the MKUltra programming may have been, like she said, stimulated in such a way that she now has the capability to see these phantom-bodied, I would like to call them plasma-bodied. That's what I'm thinking now. I'm thinking their bodies are made of plasma, the fourth state of matter, and they're fading. They're coming into consciousness because they have a relationship with her, and they know she can perceive them. And I have no trouble with this. That this is true. The problem is taking authority, human authority over these beings, and not allowing them, as programmers would seem to want, to have the upper hand, not to allow that, and to take authority through the higher self, through that divine nature of ours, over these realms that are now, I think, in this electromagnetic age, the threshold, as Rudolf Steiner said, the threshold is thinning. And what has been absent from our perception is now coming closer and closer to us. And instead of being afraid, we need to get ready. And we learn from people like Elisa, who have had the courage to unlock the programming and move through it in a human conscious way.
Well said, Elana, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's the direction we have to take going forward. We have to shed the fear, and we have to move forward in a very bold, very spiritual, and very divine way. And also, there's no doubt in my mind also that there are unseen forces or unseen worlds that are outside the bandwidth of visible light. And that parameter of visible light is what defines our existence, or at least our current existence here on Earth. And I also agree that those barriers are breaking down. So this is a very, very interesting conversation. And so I'd like to continue the thread by asking you, Elisa, when you were communicating and interacting with these beings, what was that communication and interaction like?
Most of the time with them, it was more of like a telepathic. It was very spoken, but internal mind. And that's the way we communicated back and forth. Occasionally it would be, rather than words, it was a concept. I understood. They understood. We communicated, again, silently, but it was concepts being relayed back and forth. And I have a very, very profound and photographic lucid memory of one of those when I was a teenager in the home that I was raised and very heavily programmed in, and being in my bedroom at night. And I, again, I'm standing in my room. I know it's dark. My bedroom door is closed behind me and my eyes are closed, but I know there's someone in front of me. And I ask with my mind if I can look, and I'm given the okay. And it's the concept of yes, but it's not the word yes. And I open my eyes, and it's what I call one of my main programmers, handlers. It's a cross-dimensional being, very humanoid, but clearly not human. And I would call him over the years later, I would begin to call him Cain. And I use that name because I think this being has been represented by many names over many, many, many eons, probably. But he looked, the typical, not typical, not at all typical, but he was, like I said, humanoid, but clearly not human. And when I opened my eyes, I was frightened and I was in love. I felt a flurry of emotions. I wanted to grab him. I wanted to run away screaming. Everything came through me, and I was given a short period of time to take him in visually. And then it would go blank, as if the permission was taken away at a certain point, and it was reinforced that we were kin, K-I-N, that we came from the same place, that we belonged together, that we would always be together. And I affiliate this really with the bloodline aspect, that, and then a union took place. And it wasn't a union as in sexual, but it was very, in a way, very sexual, but it was not the physical act of intercourse that a man and a woman would have. There was much deeper. And what I came to realize in deep programming and my memories of what occurred for me after that was that he inhabited me. He owned me in every way that a cross-dimensional being could own an MKUltra slave. And this was because my highest part of myself by that time had been very subdued and contained with all of the trauma and the mind control. And he would basically, from an internal perspective, handle me throughout the years. I had physical human handlers, but as far as I'm concerned, it's these beings, and there's a hierarchy, and there's very, very many of them fitting on that hierarchy, various levels, that are the first line handlers. They're the ones that I believe are a part of programming and are literally placed within with some of the altars and the programming. And this is where in my opinion, a lot of the ritual comes in through the years of trauma-based mind control. I don't believe that ritual is strictly for trauma purposes. It works that way, but I believe wholeheartedly, I would say I know from personal experience, that these entities are also placed within a slave to help handle and control the altars over the years.
Now, do they own your physical incarnation, or do they own your soul?
Well, you've asked such a light question there, Mike. Wow. That's a touchy subject for me. And, I will preface it with, I am still deprogramming. Mm-hmm. I manage my life at this point. I have sovereignty over, for the most part, I believe, my body. I have to kick somebody off every once in a while, that some low-level being that has, I'm tired or I'm stressed or I'm sick and decided they're going to try to gain access. And having said that, I don't know that I fully understand this in a way that I can explain it, but I'm absolutely certain that the utilization of my soul energy was a significant part of my abuse and use over the years. That there was in some way a capturing, whether for a period of time until I was strong enough to, activate my way of taking that back over time, I will add, as I got stronger, but that the soul energy is utilized in this, that if a person has an intact and soul, I don't believe these things could happen and they would be under programming for so many years and so forth. So somehow the bloodline and the trauma-based mind control, the science, I call it esoteric science, because I believe there's a hard and fast science to it, but there's an occult ritual aspect that involves the spirit and the soul. And I'm not a believer that programming like I went through could take without the occult esoteric side of it. In other words, I don't think it would function well. I think it would fall apart. So you have the hardcore science that they've pretty much perfected, or almost, and they're still working on that. And then you have the esoteric side, which these cross-dimensional beings are very much a part of.
Right.
So you've literally, one of the things one of my alters said when we began deep deprogramming, frantically calling out, was they're writing the technology into us. And I had to try and explain that to people, and I didn't have the information, but it's now become abundantly clear. 7 years later, literally, they are writing the technology lines and frequencies into us.
Yeah, it's very, very dark. It's very, very evil. And my next question, I guess, Elisa, would be these interdimensional beings, who are they? We hear about the archons, we hear about the jinn. Do you get a sense that it's that or something else, or you just don't know?
I have a strong sense, which is why I've used the names in my book, Cain, Lilith, Lucifer, Satan. I've chosen those names, and mainly not because those are specifically the names they need to be called, but because I grew up in a Christian-based society, and that fits for me. Mm-hmm. I think there are many names they could go by, and I think in part the switching from various human civilizations to another and the different names helps to obscure the issue somewhat, so that who's Isis, who's Lilith, who's Cain, who's Horus, who's Osiris, Semiramis, you can Satan, which one is which? How do they fit into this? If there's the old ones and the new ones, which ones are the real ones? And I think it really plays into a lot of that. As far as the archons and what I would call in the Christian religion the fallen angels, this is what I've said, and Elana can vouch for this over the years repeatedly to her, is the ones I know weren't good gone bad. The ones I know are bad.
So are you referring to the Nephilim?
Yes. And I have personally, I have an issue with the, fallen angels, and that whole storyline as far as the ones I'm dealing with. The ones that I've been dealing with my whole life, there's never been a feeling of something benevolent trying to get out. It's been a feeling of pure malevolence, pure parasitic, controlling, lower chakra. And by the way, I just want to throw this out because I don't know that I fully understand it, but in the human presentations, or the very human looking presentations of these, and I'm talking about the high level ones, the Lilith, the Cain, when they present in a human form, there are no nipples and no belly button. There's genitalia, there's all the other parts, full head of hair at times, but there are no nipples and no belly button. And I think that's pertinent in some way. I'm certain it is, though I can't fully explain it.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. It's just mind-boggling to me, and I'm really at a loss for words at certain points, because I'm listening to this, and you have to take a step back, and you have to think to yourself about the level of evilness that is taking place here. If we just go back to the beginning of our conversation, you were an infant, and you were brought into this process, this program, whatever we want to call it, and your entire existence was broken down and deprogrammed and reprogrammed, right? You were programmed to be something other than who you should have been as a human being when you came into the world. These interdimensional beings, as you'd mentioned before, the malevolence. This is just amazing stuff. So when people talk about evil, I don't really think they fully comprehend how evil is.
Right, and I want to come in on that because, of course, Rudolf Steiner has done a great deal for my life. I'm the granddaughter of a Romanian gypsy, and I've known there were spiritual worlds from day one because she raised me while my mother worked, and she was an extraordinary atavistic clairvoyant. So for me, when you say evil, or evil exists. And what does that mean? Well, there's some evil, certain levels of evil that just make us get up off our duff and stand up as moral beings. Certainly that's true. There are many things in the world that are bad and wrong, and we are given the option to develop as human beings. But there are also beings in the universe that really hate the freedom that human beings have. And we do. We have, not that we're all free, we're not, but we have the option to develop free will. And free will is so valuable. And, Rudolf Steiner says that humanity is the religion of the gods. And what he means by that is that even the angels, even the good angels, if there are good angels, they envy us because we have to struggle with our will. We have to struggle to moralize our will. And there are many beings that just want to dip into us like we're food. They want our energy, and they can glom onto us just like any parasite can. I see this as a level of evil, yes. And certainly on the level that Elisa is talking about with Cain and Lilith. I mean, I can't even speak to that. But I definitely sense that with the coming of radar, when we started seeing all the UFOs, some of which were interdimensional, not all of them. I think some of them we definitely took with the paperclip Nazis who came in, and they had been working on them. And I'm going to write about that in the next book on the space fence. I think that this radar and the writing the tech in to us, our cell phones, our amazing amount of radiation we're living with now. This is why things are moving at a lightning pace now, where I can only, as an act of faith, say to myself, we can do this. We can do this because things are getting way, way beyond radar in 1940. So now we are going to have to really look at ourselves and say, before transhumanism comes in, before singularity begins to bring all the cyborgs and the clones, what is a human being? Is it just someone with 2 arms and 2 legs who walks upright and has a neocortex? No, I don't think so. And I am a great fan of the future of humanity. And I certainly am not feeling defeated in the least yet, not in the least. But I am rallying to the challenge because I'm not going to say, like many New Agers would, oh, everything turns out for the best. I don't think that's true. I think that is a Luciferic lie. And I will simply keep strong and continue to do what I'm doing, even though I can't change it tomorrow, even though I can't offer everybody a blue pill or a red pill or whatever and say it's all okay. This is real adult work here that we have. And I appreciate you too, Mike, because you are a worker. I can tell.
Well, I feel the same way as you do, Elana, that, we are in a fight. We are in a battle. We have to step up the game, and we have to continue to do the right things. We have to continue to put the truth out there, and we have to continue to ensure that humanity does understand what humanity is. And we can win this, and we will win this. It's going to be a slog because it's not going to be an overnight thing. I tell people all the time, it's not the light switch is on, the light switch is off. It just doesn't work that way. But we have to keep going. And to be honest with you, and you tell me if you're seeing the same things, I am seeing cracks in their armor. And I'm going to talk about I'm talking about the evildoers. I am seeing them start to unravel, and I am starting to see humanity wake up. Different rates and paces depending upon who the person is, but at the very least, more and more people are seeing that this world is not operating the way it's supposed to work, and everything is upside down, everything is dysfunctional, and they're seeing it. So I don't know. I think that spark is there now.
Yes. And I feel like I am a testament to the true benevolent human spirit, the true highest part that's connected to what's beautiful and creative, that doesn't have the ability to destroy. It's just a creative energy. And what I know is that that's stronger than any of this, any of them, any of this. However, if it is subdued, if it is captured in a way, if it is ignored, it's something that needs to be, there needs to be action with it. It's not just a matter of, to me, it's not just a matter of, yeah, that's something beautiful, but it's not something I have to really pay any attention to or work with on a daily basis. It's a struggle. It's a daily recommitment. For me, every day, I wake up every day and recommit, because it's something that is very personal, very individual. To me, the community comes as a byproduct of the individual work. The personal truths that must be faced can be devastating. The other side of that is there's a strength that can never be taken by them again. But to get to that degree, one has to face things they do not want to face. I can't even begin to tell you how many things in the course of this journey for me I've had to face, that some of the things I pushed away for a year or more. I just couldn't deal with that. I couldn't look at it. It was too horrible. And the shame and the guilt. And I think everybody has their version of that. And those personal truths, those personal fears must be faced one at a time if need be, and just keep going. But I see it. I saw it in myself. I saw this strength come up as if I'm shored up a little straighter and a little stronger every time. And now I'm managing my life. I can't make them stop attempting. I can't stop the progression of the technology that's remotely used, but I can, now that I'm aware and utilizing that truest part of me, I manage what goes on here. I make the decisions of that, and I can share that. So I very much think that absolutely know that we can. My question is, will we? As a species, will we? Not if we can, but will we choose it? Because it's a choice.
That's right. And my question before to you, Elisa, about do they own your physical incarnation or your soul? My personal take on it is they cannot take your soul. That what they do is they break down the mind-body dynamic. Because if they can take your soul, in my view, they wouldn't have to do the things that they do to the mind and to the body to take control.
Well, I would throw one little piece in there from personal experience, and that is that in the trauma-based mind control and the programming part, as well as for me, I was utilized as a killer. That in the act of killing and participating in killing, something happens to the soul. I can't say that I know what it is. I don't know that I can even put words to it, but there is a sensation that I've carried with me for many years that they splintered my soul into a very particular number of parts. And I'm certain it has a lot to do with being in the room of lives being taken, nothing I could do about it, even being asked for help. And this was early on in programming years. And then ultimately being taken over in body and participating in the taking of life. And I assure you, there's nothing like that. I've had to relive some of that, what happens to the other person's energy, even the sensation of the entity in me absorbing that energy and me witnessing that as the life goes out of another. So there are aspects to this that I think are completely untapped in our understanding of the spirit, the soul, And when you move into the new technology, and I say for the last, when I say new, it's probably 50 years, it's been utilized as well as progressing. I think we're moving into things that would boggle the mind and what we think we know about the waves and, you know, scalar waves and plasma bodies. And, you know, we have more than our physical body. We have bodies outside our etheric body, our aura, our so on and so forth. And I know for a fact, personally, I can't prove it, but that they utilize this with the technology. For a fact, in deep deprogramming, I've had experiences that they're tapping me remotely. And there are things happening in another facility while my body lays in bed. And I'm not just talking about an astral projection. I'm talking about something that's newer, that's very sophisticated, and is very covert and not really being talked about openly.
And then there's the going to the next generation of a genetically altered human, a so-called enhanced human of transhumanism. There are people on this planet, I'm not sure if they're fully human anymore, but they very much want a different species. They want to be as gods. And so the soul must be, I tend to think that many people are so vague about these things, so vague about soul, spirit, using them interchangeably with no sense of what they're talking about. We need to get a little more accurate so that our concepts are clear and we know what we're fighting for. We know what we're fighting to keep in the human being that has been thus far. As far as the human beings of tomorrow and what has happened to them, we just have to get a little sharper and realize that that's what moving into a space age means as well, is that humanity is going to be tampered with. There's no way around it.
And, you know, I would even add to that, Mike, as you know, dark as it sounds, that's already happened in covert. That's already happened in the Black projects. They're trying, as far as I can see, over the last just handful of years, they're trying to indoctrinate the public for it already.
Yeah.
What they've already attained. And, you know, I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm absolutely certain that I have encountered soulless beings that look like everybody else. I've encountered them from afar and in person. Not high numbers, but I'm absolutely convinced they're already walking the earth.
Well, when you said you encountered these beings, soulless beings, Elisa, what are they like? I mean, do they lack empathy? They lack compassion? Are they robotic?
They look like everybody else. They sound like everybody else. And, you know, a friend of mine said, well, how do you teach me how to do that? And I sat with that for an entire day. I have no way of being able to do that. And I realized that I'm picking up something. It's an immediate sensation, you know, kind of along the lines of just the sensitivities that what I'm dealing with looks and sounds like, but there's something missing. And it's profound what's missing. It's the human element that's missing. They look human, they're flesh and blood. And one in particular, I don't think this person has a clue what they are, and that what's really running them. So it's not as simple as, you know, they're going to mess up their speech or they're going to look robotic. They're beyond that. They're into things that's really the way I can put it. It sounds science fiction and it's not. They're into things that have been actualized in the Black projects, and they're in the process of attempting to move that, which is an ongoing process. It'll go on for many years to move it into the public sector. And you can go this, to me, it feels vindication when I see these articles from science and tech and, you know, on the web that are talking about what's coming in 20 years. Well, you know, 20 years below ground was 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yep. And, they are conditioning the public and they're doing it in a very basic way. But, everything that we're seeing today about transhumanism, talking about the singularity, talking about, and the whole Bruce Jenner thing, transgender, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's conditioning. That's shaping the minds and the thoughts of the people to start accepting that genders don't really exist anymore. Men and women, it doesn't really matter anymore.
Right.
And so trying to get people acclimated toward that direction. And I agree. I mean, I can only imagine where they are at with their technology and their science. It's just, it's mind-boggling. We don't even know. I mean, probably your wildest crack at what they might be doing is probably they're 1,000 times past that. It's just really unbelievable. It really is.
And keep in mind, by crossing, and I think you're right on the mark with the conditioning with the transgender. And the reason is, if you remove the human element of creation, the sacred womb and feminine, and that idea that humanity gives birth to creation, if you remove that, you remove a piece of what our concept of humanity is.
Yep.
You're prepping the field for, well, we can create that in a
Right.
lab.
Like humanimals. What about
Yes.
humanimals? Yeah, they want us to be humanimals as well, not just those poor cows that have some aspect of a human body in them. Oh, it's disgusting.
I'm telling you, the audience, you're listening to this, you have to start getting your head wrapped around what's really going on. And I know it sounds like science fiction, it sounds crazy, and it sounds like we're in bizarro world. I always tell people we are in bizarro world, but this stuff is rolling out. And if you just wake up, if you just open your eyes, you can see it. Like I was just talking about the transgender aspect of it. You can see it rolling out. You can see what they're doing. But so many folks are just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we can't even get them to take a look and see a chemtrail, looking
Well,
at
they're afraid.
their shoes, looking at their feet,
Yeah. I mean, there are souls on the planet now that are at all different levels.
Yep.
There are very young souls here. There are very old souls here. I mean, some of those old souls are good. Some of those old souls are really bad. I mean, it's a real mixed bag here. We are on a transition slope that is scary to many, many people. And I have compassion for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always say that I know my soul signed up to come here and to do the work that I'm doing,
Yes.
but I'm not coming back.
Oh, you think so? Oh, Mike, you think so?
This is my last tour of duty. I'm sorry.
I don't think it's that simple, Mike. Sorry about that.
Well, ladies, this has been really a great conversation. Seriously, there were moments, Elisa, when I was at a loss for words. I had a bunch of questions written down, and you would go someplace in your discussion, and I was like, I don't know what to follow up with. It's just because you have to sit there, and I had to kind of just process it, and take it in what you were saying. I mean, programmed to kill.
Mike, make sure that you pitch her book.
Oh, absolutely.
Too, okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And so she can make a little money.
Oh yeah, well, Elisa, tell us
People
about your book. We have time. Tell us about the book.
I wrote 2 books, and kind of try to give a cross section of the programming years and then the use years, and some of the techniques I've used to help with deep programming in the second book. They're both titled the same, Our Life Beyond MKULTRA, Book 1 and Book 2. And I did, as I mentioned earlier, a series of collages that are really, really special for me and all of us in here. There's 36 collages, and I had to put them in the book in black and white because of the cost. I wanted people to be able to afford the book. It's very inexpensive, by the way. And so what a friend of mine did, he's a photographer, and he took some really high resolution photos of the collages, and they are currently can be viewed. I think they're all up, all 36, at my blog site, which is www.ourlifebeyondmkultra.wordpress.com. And there's also several articles, and I have a resource section that has a lot of links, and a lot of links about current technology and science and so forth. So it's a good source, and a lot of the old MKUltra information, documentation, and so forth.
Now, have you been hassled, Elisa, or has anybody come to you and say, hey, you need to be quiet?
In their ways, particularly early on, a lot of threatening gestures, people showing up that I didn't know, and now I'd have to say most of it is entity at this point. It's they don't send any, as far as I can tell, they don't send anyone in anymore. There were several attempts to send in what I call benefactors to be potential handlers. And that all flopped, so they tried for a few years and then realized I just was too awake and not taking the bait, or had disconnected from everything. So now I just feel that I get the more of the entity interaction.
This has been really a great conversation. Elisa, you can come back anytime.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate
You can
that.
come back anytime to boggle my mind. I feel for you. It's an amazing story.
Yeah. Well, I hope that some survivors and victims contact you through this. And, I don't know if you're up for contact in some way.
I set up my blog site without contact. I just felt like that could invite a whole undesirables so I'm eventually.
Let me know.
Yeah, that's true. If there's something that looks, pretty interesting and somebody's really in need, you can contact Elana. She knows how to contact me. But I think I'm going to hold off from the public contact right now for a little while longer.
Good work, Mike. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, ladies, have a great night.
Thank
You
you.
too.
And it was great talking to you.
You as well.
And that concludes my interview with Elisa and Elana, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to Elisa's website and her books can be found in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, Sage of Quay Radio. And you can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.